Have you guys ever been promised something, but then when the time came through for that promise to actually be fulfilled, it didn't happen? Josiah, you answered really loud. Do you want to? Do you want to share? You want to share?
Alright, so basically I was promised new shoes, and the shoes never came.
Oh, dang. Was that by your mom
No,
or by who?
I won a bet with some guy, and he didn't actually.
That's why you don't bet, bro. But yeah, it sucks, right? It sucks when you have something promised to you and it doesn't come through, right? Yeah. You know, I have my own story too. It happened to me a few years ago when I was playing for my 8th grade school soccer team at Maplehurst. Any of you guys go to Maplehurst right now? Yeah, quite a few of you. Oh yeah. Used to. Yeah, same. Yeah. So I was new to the school. I just moved to Moncton, and yeah, it was my first year on the soccer team. I had made the team, and I was training well. I was playing well, and I felt like I was really showcasing myself well. And my coach seemed to notice this too. And I really felt like I'd have a good chance to be a solid, like, important player for the team throughout the season. But for the first few games, I wasn't really playing all that much. I was only getting like 15 to 20-minute appearances off the bench. And it sucked, you know, because I felt like I was playing well. I was training well. I wasn't being lazy in training or anything. I was actually being committed to the team, but I wasn't reaping the reward in game time, right? So I asked my coach about it, and he told me, Farron, don't worry, you know, we're going to make the playoffs anyway. It's just the regular season. Make sure you keep training well, and I'll slowly integrate you into the team so that when the important games come, you'll be there and you'll be ready and you'll be sharp. So I believed him because obviously I didn't know my coach that well. It was a new relationship with him, and I had to respect him. So I continued training. I was diligent with everything, and yeah, I just kept going. But nothing really changed. I still found myself on the bench, 15 to 20-minute appearances. Like, the most I played in a game was probably 20 minutes, and it sucked because I was doing well. I was really showing myself well, but I wasn't reaping the reward in the game. And then playoff season came. So by the time the playoffs came, I asked my coach about it one more time, like, what's going on? And he said, yeah, don't worry. These are the really, really important games, you know? This is where we really have to play our best team because we want to win the banner. So obviously this time I was really skeptical because he had kind of told me this twice now, but didn't come through. So I kept training still, you know, I was professional about it. I was still committed to the team. By the time playoffs came, I was super excited to just show myself and actually get the chance to showcase my abilities. But by the time the playoffs actually came, in the 2 games combined, the semifinals and finals, I played a grand total of 0 minutes. I didn't touch the pitch once, and it broke my heart because huh? What did you say? Okay. But yeah, it was heartbreaking because I felt like, you know, I was playing well. Like, I wasn't being lazy. It's not like I was being lackadaisical in training. I was actually trying to be committed to the team, but I wasn't reaping that reward in the game. You know, the team still won the banner, and it was cool to be a part of that, but at the same time, I wasn't really a part of that, and it sucked, you know? Especially after what my coach told me, it was really, really heartbreaking not to be involved. And I realized that everything my coach had told me up to that point was a lie. You know, he kind of tricked me, whether it was intentional or not. My coach tricked me. His words were dead, you know? That doesn't feel good at all. Like, I couldn't wholeheartedly trust anything that he was gonna tell me because he'd already broken my trust with his words multiple times, and his words didn't match his actions. You know, and sometimes our faith can look a little bit like that. You know, we can claim to be Christian, we can claim to love God and to keep his commands, but when we really look at our lives, it doesn't really reflect that truth. And a lot of the time, it can even be the complete opposite. Now, we have to make sure that our faith isn't just that cross or that Bible verse in our Instagram bio. It should be a living, breathing thing, and that's what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about integrity. Integrity is all about your inside matching your outside. Your words should match your actions. Your faith should match with your deeds. So everything that I'm speaking on today is based on James, and yeah, James is just my favorite book in the Bible. It's a really interesting book because it's super straightforward and blunt almost. It's a super short book. You can read it in one sitting easily. It's only 5 chapters, and it's almost like a Christian guided book. And James is like this Christian life coach. He gives super practical steps on how to live and how to act as a Christian. And in this specific passage that we're going to read, he's talking all about your faith and how that faith should be reflected in your actions. So I'll start from verse 14. It will be on the screen, yeah? What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. So this part right here, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. James is basically saying that our faith needs to match our actions. We can't proclaim a faith that nobody ever sees evidence of. Faith and works should be inseparable in the life of a believer. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. Moving on to verse 18 then. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there's one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed in God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. So, in this specific part, I really want to highlight Abraham, because James references Abraham. Do you all know who Abraham is in the Bible, for the most part? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, he's this super important figure in the Old Testament, and thousands of years ago when Abraham was around 75 years old, God just told him to basically pack his life up and leave everything he knew, his family, his friends, his home, everything that he knew, God told him to leave. And it came with the promise that Abraham would be prosperous, that he would become a great nation, that his name would be great. Now, let's say God revealed himself to you and told you to pack up your life and go somewhere with the promise of being great. Would you just do it? Realistically. If God told you to go to some random country like Uzbekistan and lodge there and stay there, and yeah, you're gonna be great, you're gonna become the father of all nations, would you actually just go without hesitation and do it? You think so? Okay, that's fair. I feel like some of us would. Me personally, I'd be really skeptical because it's just not natural. But Abraham did it without hesitation, and that's a great example of faith. It marked the start of the Abraham covenant. All the land, all the descendants, and all the blessings that Abraham was promised, he got them. Now, Abraham is one of the people that everybody looks up to as an example of true faith. And I think the big reason that James references Abraham in this passage is that he didn't just hear God's word and believe it, but he actually acted on God's word. He packed up his bags, he uprooted his whole life, and he moved. All because God told him to move. And he's the first major example of that integrity that we're going to be focusing on today, because his feet followed his faith. Make sense? Nice. Okay, 2 more verses. Verse 25. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. So, the figure that James references here is Rahab, and she's kind of similar to Abraham in their significance within the passage. Rahab is important because she acted in obedience to God's commands, even when it was dangerous for her. Joshua was a big figure in the Old Testament, and Joshua sent Israelite spies to Jericho, where Rahab was staying. And these spies, they met with Rahab, and they took lodging in Rahab's house to protect themselves from the forces and the law enforcement in Jericho. And this, what Rahab did there, it was insanely, insanely dangerous for her to do because she was basically committing treason. She was going against the laws of her city to fulfill God's purpose because she could have easily been executed for what she was doing because, like, you're not supposed to keep enemy spies in your territory, right? That's not how it should work. But Rahab still did it. She didn't just sit around and hope that things went right for the soldiers. She actually acted, and because she believed in God's plan and purpose, her feet followed that. That was evidenced through her actions. No? Make sense? Awesome. Okay, so yeah, that's the passage, that's James. Before I move on, I think it's super important to highlight the contrast that you see between Abraham and Rahab. Rahab is like messy background. Her title within the Bible is literally a prostitute. And yeah, she's probably not like super low social standing at the time. She's probably not someone you would look to as someone God can use immediately. But Abraham, on the other hand, he was this super great example of faith, almost your blueprint Christian guy, like the goat of Christianity, if you will. Yeah. And yeah, it just highlights something super important. It's that God doesn't look at your status when he's, asking you to make a move for him. It doesn't matter if you're the perfect church kid or somebody who has like the messiest background in your school, because that's not what integrity is all about. Rahab had faith and moved. Same way Abraham had faith and moved. Integrity is all about making a move for God right now, and it doesn't matter who you are. Yeah, so that's the passage, and well, obviously, like, James wasn't talking to us when he wrote this. He was talking to a specific group of people. So I'm gonna give a little 2-minute history lesson. I promise it won't be boring. 2 minutes on just what James is and the context of it. Yeah. So who wrote James? James wrote James. James was Jesus' brother, and James actually didn't believe that Jesus was Lord until after Jesus rose from the dead, even though he lived with him all that time. His brother was literally the Son of God, but he didn't believe it, which I think is super, super interesting. Now what? James is basically writing a guidebook for Christians. And in the way he does it, he almost like roasts these fake Christians in the way he speaks. Like, he's super, super blunt and like just direct in what he says, like in the passage we just read. You believe in God, good. Like, the demons believe that too, so what? Act on your faith. Yeah. Now for the where and when, this was written to early Christians across Jerusalem, around like right in the middle of the first century. And yeah, these Christians were scattered across various regions of Jerusalem, and they were being persecuted at the time. And then for the why, churches were basically being hypocrites. The churches that James was writing to at the time, they were being super hypocritical. They'd say that I believe in God, but they'd ignore the poor. They'd be super mean to one another. Their faith wouldn't match their actions. Yeah. So that's the history lesson. And for the quick summary of like what exactly is going on in the passage, first I want to address like some confusion that might arise, because when we read James, and I'm sure most of you have probably read like one of Paul's letters, like Romans, Ephesians, Galatians, Philippians, yeah. Paul, in all of those letters, he really emphasizes the fact that we're saved by grace through faith. But now in that passage of James that we just read, he mentions that faith alone isn't enough. You need works to back that up. So how does that work, right? Is that not a contradiction? But really, they're answering two different questions. See, what Paul was addressing is that people were trying to earn their way to heaven by checking these religious boxes, by just being a good person. They felt like they could gain that salvation. So Paul challenged this by asking this: how do we get saved? And his answer was faith. Faith alone earns our salvation. It's not anything that we can do because we're sinful people. James, on the other hand, was addressing hypocrisy because people are hypocrites. And now James's challenge was, now you're saved by that grace through faith. But what does true faith look like? And I wrote Paul's answer, but it's James's answer is actions. So, yeah, James and Paul were answering two different questions. And yeah, they're kind of reconciled because, like, if you look at it this way, Paul talks about the root of salvation, and James talks about the fruit of salvation. And you can't have the fruit without the root, so they go hand in hand in that way. Yeah. Essentially, James is saying that you can't have faith as just an internal thought or feeling. You know, if someone has faith but doesn't change, they don't truly have faith. Your actions can't betray what you believe. You know, they should be an outward expression of your relationship with God, because genuine faith always results in obedience to Christ's teachings. You know, it's not enough to just listen to his teachings. We have to do what they say. And yeah, it's highlighted in a verse in the chapter before in James, James 1, 23 to 24, should be on the screen. It says, for if you listen to the word and don't obey, it's like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, you walk away, and you forget what you look like. Think about that. Imagine you look in the mirror, and then 5 minutes later, not even 5 minutes later, right away you walk away and you're like, oh, what shirt was I wearing again? Did my hair look like this? Like, the concept in itself is ridiculous, and it's interesting that James compares it to like having faith and not acting on that faith, because that concept in itself is ridiculous. Why would we have faith but then not show that faith, you know? Like, think about a zombie. You know, James 2:26 says that as a body without a spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. A zombie looks like a person. A zombie has the clothes of a person, it walks like a person, and it talks like a person. But when you look on the inside of a zombie, it's dead. You know, there's no heartbeat to it, there's no substance, there's no pulse. It's just useless, dead tissue. And that's exactly what faith without works is. It's a zombie faith. It looks like it on the outside, but internally it's shallow, it's hollow, it doesn't have a pulse or a heartbeat. And the cure for that zombie faith is integrity. So, yeah, how do you now what do we do about this? How do we now apply this all kind of to our lives? And I kind of just have 2 points on how we can address this for real. Point number 1 is that integrity is all about closing the gap. Now, what do I mean by closing the gap? I know that a lot of us, we tend to have a gap between who we are in that group chat and who we are at church, or who we are in the locker room and who we are at our youth group. You know, and this is a problem, because it means that our faith only shows itself in enclosed and controlled environments. You know, if we only act like Christians around other Christians, that's not true faith. That's just a costume. We've already talked about it before. A body without a spirit is a zombie. A Christian with a massive gap between their words and their actions is the same thing spiritually. It's a spiritual zombie. You know, on Sunday it might look like it. Yeah, you have this heartbeat, I'm worshiping God, I'm praising God, but come Monday, it's shallow, it's hollow, everything is fading away, and you kind of revert back to the worldly ways. Now, we can sit here and say we believe in Jesus' command to love others, but when we get to the lunch table on Monday and we see this kid that's a little bit different from us, we start laughing at them, gossiping about them, you know? How does that work? How can we be doing that when we claim to love God and to keep his command of, love your neighbor as yourself? Doesn't make sense, right? So how do we close that gap then? And I think it all starts with consistency. You know, we have to decide that we're going to be the same person everywhere we go. In this building, if we believe that Jesus is Lord, then Jesus is Lord on the soccer field or the basketball court too. Jesus is Lord in that math class with that annoying teacher who is trying to do everything in their power to just make your life miserable. I'm not going to name any names, but yeah. And he's Lord in the private times too, not just when you're around people, but when you're alone with yourself, because we're not trying to be performative in what we're doing. We're just actually trying to make a genuine shift to our identity and who we are. You know, we have to stop hiding behind cheap words. That's what closing the gap is. That's what integrity is. So the next time we find ourselves about to join on that gossip session or that group chat roast session or whatever it might be, we stop and we remember that our faith should match our actions. Our inside has to match our outside, even when it makes us stand out, because that's what God calls us to do. Okay, that's point number 1. Point number 2 is that integrity means choosing a side. You see, now that we know that we have a gap between our words and our actions, we have to do something about it. We can't be friends with the world and friends with God at the same time. That doesn't work. Something has to give. We can't keep sitting on the fence. Eventually, we have to pick a side. But what are these sides? See, we can either change the way we speak or we can change the way we act. Now, changing the way we speak means that we realize we don't want to be Christian, and we stop pretending at church, and we admit that we just want to live like the world because that's what our actions represent. Or we can actually change the way we act. We can decide that our behavior is actually going to match what we say, and we put our faith into motion. But why do we need to pick a side? We need to pick a side because that's what integrity is. And we need integrity to follow Christ. We can't just choose to follow Jesus when it's cool because that discredits our faith. We're called to be disciples, and that means something really, really important because disciples didn't just listen to their teacher's words. They followed their teacher everywhere they went, step by step, even when it made them look ridiculous and crazy. We're going to tear ourselves apart if we keep trying to fit one foot into the world's door and one foot into God's door. We're either all in on the world or we're all in on Christ. And there really can't be an in-between. Okay. Now that we've addressed that, how do you all go and actually enact this in your lives? Firstly, I'm going to get you all to kind of do something. Just close your eyes. Close your eyes and picture yourself in a room with one group of people is your parents, one group of people are your teachers, one group of people are your non-Christian friends, and we'll add a fourth person, yourself, when you're alone and nobody's around. Now, if these four people groups were all individually asked to describe who you are, would they all agree, or would they describe four different people? Are you living with consistency throughout your whole life, or are you living a quadruple life? That's an interesting question. It should make you think because that's why we have to be consistent in our faith. You all can open your eyes again. We have to live out our faith in every single aspect of our life, not just with our Christian friends in church on Sunday mornings. We can't be stagnant. We can't just sit there. That's not what God calls us to do. If we find ourselves in an environment where we can represent Christ through our actions, we have to do it. We have massive potential to make impacts in the lives of others. Let's look at it this way. So, this is a tea bag. This tea bag is going to represent us, Christians. I'm going to pour water into a cup, and the water is going to represent our environment, where we find ourselves in, our schools, our sports teams, everywhere. Okay. So, the tea bag right here represents us. It has all the right ingredients. It's labeled as tea. If you ask it what it is, it will tell you that it's tea. But if I place it like here, next to the water, if it's just standing around, is it really tea? Not really. Look at the water. It represents our environment, our school, our sports, anything. When you place the tea bag next to the water remains unchanged. Why is that? Because the tea bag is keeping its contents to itself. It's not dipping itself in the water. And that can be like us sometimes. We have the label of tea, but we're not dipping it in and becoming real tea. We have all the right ingredients, but we're not becoming real tea. If it just stays here and doesn't become real tea, the tea bag itself will begin to question if it's real tea. Just like the tea bag, we keep standing alongside the world without dipping our faith into these worldly environments. A tea bag that doesn't turn water into tea has no purpose. And in the same way, a faith that isn't evidenced by works is dead. Our faith should naturally make an impact in the lives of others, and eventually the people around you and even yourself may begin to question if you're really a Christian, if you really believe what you say you believe, if you're just standing around and not dipping yourself into the environment and not making an impact in the lives of others. But now, when I drop the tea into the tea bag, the tea begins to change color. Naturally, as it's in its environment and as it's actually dipping itself into the lives of others, it's changing the flavor of those around it. Naturally, because it's living out its purpose. It's no longer just being a bystander. It's naturally sharing its contents with its environment. It's an influence now. And it's changing, like I said, it's changing the flavor of everything it touches. And that's what integrity is. When we stop standing around and we actually influence others. We have to dip our faith and we have to showcase our faith everywhere we go, not just, when it's easy, not just around our Christian friends. That's what integrity is. But yeah, a lot of the time, like throughout this message, I've really tried to emphasize the we aspect of this because we're all figuring this out together. I'm figuring this out with you guys, Just because I'm up here preaching the message doesn't mean I have my whole life figured out. It's the opposite, really. We're all teenagers or preteens, whatever, figuring out life together, and that's the beautiful thing about all this. So essentially, we want to be people whose words mean something, because talk is cheap. We can say whatever we want, whenever we want, but words without actions behind them, they lose their meaning, they lose their value, just like the words of my coach back in 8th grade. Our lives need to be proof of our mouths. If we praise and worship here on Sunday, but walk into school tomorrow just to act like everybody else, what do those words on Sunday actually mean? Nothing. People will see us following Jesus through our integrity. Our faith will show itself when it has a physical receipt. But it's easy to say that we're going to go out and do this. When you hear a message like this, you feel super motivated, but when you actually get to this point where you have the opportunity to showcase your faith, you hesitate, you stop, and we revert to fear and uncertainty. We're scared. It's easier to just put that cross in our bio and blend in. But because when you actually start to stand up for the lonely, be honest when it's hard, people might look at you differently. We might feel a little bit of hate or awkwardness. We might lose a few friends even. And it's a real struggle, and it's fine to admit that because it's real. But Jesus knows it's going to happen, and we can take heart because he tells us that it's going to happen. Another one of my favorite Bible verses is John 15:18. And it says, if the world hated you, remember that it hated me first. Verse 19 says, if the world would love you as one of its own, if you belong to it, but you're no longer part of the world. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you. That's encouraging, that's real, and that's super, super important because it means we don't have to walk through school in fear of being different because Jesus was different too. We have to embrace it. We have to take heart in it just like Jesus did. Yeah, people might look at us a little bit differently. People might be awkward around us. People might begin to dislike us because we've changed. We won't blend in perfectly with the world anymore because we're actually going to start moving in our faith. The band can begin to come back up and prepare to lead us in worship. We don't have to be scared of this. We don't have to be supernatural about it either because our faith should no longer just be an add-on to our lives. Our faith is our identity. We're children of God. We're going to be different. We're going to stand out because that's what God calls us to do. God knows this is going to happen. So, yeah, we weren't put on this earth to please man. We were put on this earth to please God and God alone because we're his children and not the world's children. Everybody is God's child when they decide to give their life to him, and we have to walk in that freedom and assurance everywhere we go because it's what God commands us to do. That's what integrity is. That's faith lived out. So we shouldn't be afraid of being different. And if anything, we should be afraid of having a dead faith. We should step out in boldness. We should step out in our identity as God's child. We have to show the receipts of our faith. We have to back our check. We have to walk our talk. We got to live our faith out loud. We have to make sure that everybody including ourselves, has absolutely no doubt where our identity lies, because it lies in Him. That's what integrity is. It's when your faith is evidenced by your actions. So, as we go throughout our week and as we try to live in that freedom, let's represent Christ everywhere we go, because, like I've said, that's exactly what He calls us to do. So why don't we do it?